Okay, this video is going to kind of, oops, not cover, basically the sort of animation part and then converting your animation into MP4 in Rhino and Grasshopper. So, there's a file that you can download from, that's a turntable file. It will look like this initially, right? I'll zoom out a little bit. I'll change it to shaded mode. But essentially, there's a kind of large disk that counts for the background, and in the layers, it's on the sort of base layer, but it's a locked geometry. I use this sometimes, right, for animations, just establish some kind of horizon line, right, as opposed to be kind of floating empty in space. You'll see that you have to install initially two plugins, so Human and Tapeworm, which you can find in Rhino using the package manager, and just search for Human. It's this middle one uh, by Andrew Human and install. I already have mine installed, but install that. And then the other one to look for is Tapeworm, which is here. Same thing, install that. Now, this is important because it actually does tell you that you have to install FFmpeg, which we'll look at right after this. But install both these and then relaunch your Rhino, right? Whenever you install a new plugin this way, you have to close and restart Rhino. So, okay. And then the last one is FFmpeg, right? Which you can get here, or if you just Google it, FFmpeg. And you can find the downloads for FFmpeg here for Windows, right? And then you can kind of get these exe files if you want. I did already. Let me click on one, right? And so you can kind of find release builds. So I honestly, Essentials is actually fine. I provide you with the full release, but Essentials probably is okay as well. So what you'll get eventually, and I'm hosting this particular zip file on Canvas here, but place it in your C drive and actually ideally in the root C folder, right? So if you downloaded this, what you should probably get is uh here I actually will download it here right now as well. And we just have to unzip it and put the folder in the root C drive. We'll wait while that kind of downloads a little bit. But what this kind of is going to set up is essentially kind of like a way to do inside Rhino and using Grasshopper, right? Let's say turntable animations. And these are, or let's say path, right? Oriented, link a camera to a path. You can specify a path direction or a point and animate both. Or you can kind of do kind of like elongated path, right? Kind of settings like this, and kind of give both, right? A target and a camera location, basically animate both. And this complete just relies on you kind of setting up your sort of viewing modes correctly, right? Whatever you want to turn on and off, this kind of stuff. So hopefully, so this right in my downloads, right? I'll get a FFmpeg master latest WinGPL, right? This is a zip file. You can extract, right, using whether it's Windows or WinRAR, anything like this, right? You can extract everything. This will have a folder in there, so just extract everything to the same location, right? Right now, which is in Windows and under downloads, right? But basically, what you want to do is actually take that folder, copy, paste, or cut, right? And go to your computer, right? Your local disk, and you basically want to paste it. I already have it here, right? You basically want to paste it to your In this case, ideally like your root C drive. That's the easiest place for eventually Tapeworm to find it. So, uh, and that's it. So those three things are the prerequisites to being able to do this. Okay, so you can see the thing itself is actually quite simple. Um, the definition. So we'll start, and you should, if everything's installed correctly, at least initially, you should find a human tab over here and then a tapeworm tab over here, right? So we'll start with human and kind of set this up. I will point out that the file that I gave you does have a named view. So that's called animation1, NE01. This named view I kind of set up beforehand. Right now it's kind of floating around everywhere. This is the named view that we eventually are going to use. So what I want to do is under right the human tab, I'm going to look for sometimes I forget where these are. Okay, modify viewport under document. This is the one, and actually I'm going to turn on the full names here just to make it a bit more obvious since this is a pretty short um, definition. So viewport name, this will basically be here, right? NE01. This is we want this to match perfectly. So double slash N ANI01. You want to make sure this text matches your viewport, otherwise it won't grab the right thing, right? We don't need this right now. We need to set the display mode. So you can actually set these display modes like kind of however you want. You could do rendered or Arctic, essentially whatever kind of maybe gives you better definition. For this, I'll use Arctic for now, right? So Arctic, oh sorry, double slash Arctic, capitalize it, all this sort of stuff. It has to be exactly the same as the display mode you are using, right? Okay. Now, camera location and camera target, these two actually can be static, but we are eventually going to animate a slider. So, in this case, I already kind of in the file have drawn a camera trajectory here, which is this spiral. And then you'll see if I hide this temporarily, I also drew a camera trajectory for the target, right? And these are both curves. So we need curve containers. And you could name these, let's say camera position, right? And camera target. Oops. Right, these two curves, oops, typo. Right. So the target curve set one is the small vertical and the camera position is the big spiral. Right. So we can link those guys in. Right. And then we eval curve. So this guy, the second one with the T parameter kind of setting, right? Curves goes in there. The T parameter is 0 to 1, right? So typical params, input number slider, box standard number slider, which then gives us that, right? Now you'll notice that it actually, on the 0 end, it starts at the beginning, but on the 1 end, it doesn't go all the way. So we do need to reparameterize this curve, right click, reparameterize, right? So then now it's reparameterized to the entire length of the spiral. Okay, same thing, copy, paste the one below, and just swap out the target curve in there. We can keep the slider the same one because we want to animate this one slider. And you can kind of see the relationship between those two right now. Okay? And actually that point, right, is what's going to be the camera location. And the second one is the camera target. And that's kind of how that is set up. So I'm going to move these a little bit so it's a little bit more obvious. Okay. Projection toggles between parallel or perspective, right? Projections, right? It's a Boolean toggle. right? And then since in this case we actually want it to be a perspective, so I'm going to toggle that to true. And the camera length is basically your zoom, right? So in this case we can go from, let's say, one, I mean, there's no zero, so zero, but one in terms of length, zero to, let's even like 60, or 1 to 60, for example. That's 69. It's fine. But this basically controls camera length, right? So how wide your field of view is, right? So you can set it to actually what would be a, 30 millimeter lens, 20 millimeter lens, whatever. Camera up is like the direction, so like your frame doesn't go off on a weird angle. So up is the Z axis, right? So unit Z goes that way. Right now, I'm gonna change my display. Okay, it is in Arctic to begin with. So what it'll do, if as soon as you slide the slider, it will snap your viewport, right? Your view to where it should be. And if you drag it, right, basically you're going to kind of spiral around while looking centered at your camera target, like that. Okay. Alrighty. And then so this part is actually just the animation part. So this actually, right, this is kind of setting up the animation. Um, what I would do, especially eventually for the export, is actually just kind of set up a file somewhere. I'm gonna delete this and right click, right? And you can make this anywhere. I'm just gonna do it in my downloads, right? So animation, for example, folder. This is an output folder, right? And what we do here, and keeping in mind that like everything that shows up in your viewport will be saved exactly as is. So you might, tweak your viewport settings to make it do whatever you want it to do. It can be shaded, ghosted, rendered, whatever, right? Actually, I'm going to show the sculpture thing back, right? But like curves like this will also show up, right? So if you're in Arctic mode and that curve is there, it's going to be there, right? In the export. So just be aware. You might want to say, okay, I want to hide the camera path, right? I hid the camera path. There's still the red preview display there. That's because my grasshopper display preview is still on. So I might want to turn that off, right? So I don't see a distracting kind of camera path. Right. So we can go to the number slider in this case, right? Right click, animate, right? And then I'll set where this should go. So I'm going to browse to my downloads, animation, and then say select folder. And it will bring up this dialog box right here. I know where things are going to get saved. We can do JPEG, we can do PNG. If you're not too worried about size, I would just do PNG. Probably it causes less issues. You can rename what the first frame tag will be, right? This doesn't really matter at this point, but just know that you can rename these as well as the formatting because these are output sequential, right, kind of frames. Resolution can be a fixed resolution. This toggle basically kind of links it to your viewport size, or you can actually set explicitly, let's say 1920 by 1080, let's say export dimensions, right, and a specific frame count. Obviously, keep in mind frame count typically is done at something like 30 frames per second. So a 600 frame animation would equal 20 seconds, right? So I'm gonna do something like 180 for now, right? Which basically would be 6 seconds to complete the animation. You can include a tag if you want. Basically, it would append the slider value right to the end of each frame, so you know the correlation between frame number and slider value. But we don't need to do that. Okay, the preview shows you what the first frame is look like. It should be exactly what your viewport looks like, and you say okay, and it will basically kind of slowly, as you see the grasshopper slider kind of iterate through, save each frame to the location, and you can see them popping up here in this animation folder now. I'll change my view to medium icons. Right, so you'll see these all kind of starting to come in as it saves each frame. And you might have to give it a second, right, depending on how fast or slow your settings are. So be aware, right, again, like I have a frame around this just because still have the curves outlined for this on. So you can hide show curves, shadow settings, anything that is in the sort of like visual display settings will kind of stay or sort of exist here, right? So you can kind of experiment with a little bit. Once it's done, then I should have essentially frame. Let's see. Let me kind of resort that, right? So I should have what 180 frames, right? Here in this folder, and you can kind of cycle through them, right? If you click very fast, then it's almost like an animation, right? Now these are single frames, so obviously if you have Premiere or similar kind of video editing software, you can actually link in a folder, right, or the image sequence and have it render out as a MP4, right, video file this way. But that's where Tapeworm comes in. So with Tapeworm, not this. Here with Tapeworm, what we're able to do is actually basically kind of use FFmpeg, which is what you kind of unzipped earlier, which typically is a command line interface, right? Uh, sort of DOS based kind of program. It gives us a way to interface with it, right? So if you had unzipped it correctly, this should work. If you didn't, then this will crash your file, like it will freeze everything. So be careful, make sure that you did follow the instructions and put FFmpeg right in your local C sort of directory right here. So I'm gonna go to Tapeworm, right? The first kind of input, output information, IO, just drag and drop it in. All right, and it'll search, right? Basically, right now, what it's doing is kind of actually looking for your FFmpeg install. And we can then give it a couple things. First, the source path, which is a file path. It's like this, generic file path. And right click on the file path and set one existing file, right? And this should be your downloads animation, right? Kind of location. You can kind of click on the very first frame and it should recognize it, right? I'm using PNG, so it works. If you're using Rhino 7 or earlier, it has to be a PNG. If you're using Rhino 8 or later, then it can be a JPEG, except this will still be orange. That still works. Uh, Target folder is going to by default the source folder, so it'll put it back there. So we don't have to worry about that. And then we need to give it a target file name. We can do it more explicitly. So if we want to basically use a panel, double slash animation. So if I can spell, okay, and it will basically call that file an animation file. All right. Settings actually gives you the options to go from your frames to GIF or video, for example, or GIF to video, right? These sort of inter kind of changeability. We're just going to use frames to video. IO goes into IO, right? And then you'll see a couple other settings you can set more explicit if you want to, like frame weight, but default is 30. We don't need to change that. Start frame is basically the first frame of the image sequence, unless you don't want to do that. Format by default is MP4, right? So we don't want to change that either. And then here, bit rate is the video quality between 0 and 12. So we'll just do 0 smaller than 12. Integer slider. And unless you're really concerned about size, you can make that 12. And then whether or not you want to loop it or not, which is a Boolean or uh, toggle. So that's it, right? And then the final component is the FFmpeg remote. So, oh yeah, there's a new battery mode as well. Remote settings go into here, right? This will basically, if you're kind of like testing, right, multiple iterations or trying out different settings, then this will basically allow you to overwrite, an existing file with the same name, right, unless you rename this target file name. So you can kind of set that explicitly as a Boolean toggle if you want to let it overwrite, and then so Boolean toggle. Right, which by default is set to false, right? But if you just want to override it, then you can set it to true. And then for the send, I would use a button to basically execute, right? So this thing here is essentially saving the video, using the image sequence and out exporting as a video, basically an interface to use FFmpeg. And if you click on the button, it should launch a right dialog window like this. That's blank. That means it's thinking, and it's like stitching things together. Once it's done, go to your animation folder, and you should find a animation here, which is in the form of a MP4, according to your settings and whatever you gave it. And that's it. That's the gist of it. And so you can kind of see here that you can kind of set whatever camera paths or targets and whatever geometry you have in there to create the image sequence and then use this method to actually use FFmpeg and to turn it into a video. All right, that's it.